All right, Cameron. So we are diving into so many great topics. Like I recently met you in Nashville, so it's nice to chat with you. But one of the things that I've loved, just kind of like stalking you from afar on Instagram, and I've just seen you like really come up in the prep coaching world, and I feel like you're just really fucking killing it. So I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself, even if y'all listening are not prep coaches. I just think Cameron has such a great he's just a phenomenal coach, right? And no matter where you're at in your business, you're going to learn so many things from him in terms of framework development, retention, techniques, all of those things. So I'd love for you to kind of introduce like how you got into this space and your age, because like that's also really impressive.
Well, first off, thank you. There was a lot of kind words said there, and yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. So yeah, I guess getting into this about me, I'm 25 years old. I'll be 26 in a week or so, April 15th. So like
Happy
yeah,
birthday.
however many days away. Thank you. Also, I'm getting married on Friday, so in 5 days.
What a
So
week.
we'll
What a
soon be
week.
a husband. Yeah. I have a 6-year-old little boy. If I haven't mentioned it yet, I'm from basically Atlanta, Georgia. Been and lived in Georgia my whole life. A lot of people think I'm from Florida, but no, actually, I am in Georgia. This will be going into my 6th season coaching competitively with physique-based athletes. Um, I grew up playing sports, was overweight throughout my childhood, and kind of had to be for the position I was playing in football in high school. But once I was done with that, I ended up losing weight. One thing kind of led to another, started personal training, getting into group fitness, then had my son at 19. And just due to kind of the position I was in, I had to really prioritize, I guess, like in the moment rather than, going to school and investing like towards the future. And kind of had to figure out a way to make it work. And, you know, one thing led to another, and I ended up being a competition prep coach. So, yeah.
You stumbled into success. I'm just kidding. I'm really oversimplifying that for you. Um, when would you say, like, before we dive into all of the technical stuff, right? Because people are listening to this and they've been going at it for years, right? Like they've been trying to build a business for a long time. And here you are at 25, almost 26, really doing some cutting edge stuff, in my opinion, in the prep coaching space. I'm just curious, like, what year was it where you were like, damn, I've got this? Like you were really making money.
Um, so I probably was doing it before I believed I was doing it. Um, about into my second or third season, like actually really was, doing well and could sleep peacefully at night for the most part. Again, didn't still have that like full-blown confidence in myself just yet, but I would say 2 to 3 seasons into it was when like, the traction was picking up from a number standpoint. And then I would have to say probably somewhere between like my fourth and fifth season. So what, 2022 and 2023, that's where I feel like I started to gain the ability to make moves with confidence and peace and like just have more of an identity known to my own self as a coach, if that makes sense. But yeah.
So how how are you acquiring your first clients? I know a lot of what you do now, I'm sure, again, with the reputation you've built, I'm sure a lot of it's referral, word of mouth, things like that. Somebody sees a great athlete on stage, who's your coach? Like I totally get that. But when you were first starting, like your first 10 to 25 clients, what were you doing to get them?
So this would have been like what, maybe 1 to 2 years after I was out of high school, whenever I dropped out of college into like my second semester. So I lost weight and I had some friends of mine that I played football with that were on the offensive line too. And just bigger, heavier set guys. And they were like, yo, Cam, like you gotta help me out. And I was just like, at that point, like definitely wasn't charging anything or considering myself a coach, but I was like, yeah, why not? Like, and so I had one guy that really stuck with it for probably 6, 7 months. And kind of same thing with him. Went from being, I don't know, probably like 220, 230 to down to about like 185 and, a lot more in shape. Um, then I think So I did personal training for group classes at an Anytime Fitness. And that kind of put people in my lap. Like I stepped into an opportunity more than them kind of stepping up to the plate with me. Um, and so I did that. That wasn't any like nutrition based stuff. I don't think unless it was like pre-made by Anytime Fitness. Like I certainly didn't have any kind of reins on it, but I would do those group classes. I then ended up moving to one-on-one personal training at a studio, and some of them from the group classes came with me there. And at this point too, because I was trying to take more of like an influencer approach as an athlete on social media rather than a coach, but I would um have like certain testimonials I'd be able to put out or educational stuff to try and give me some credibility. And I think simply due to the fact that I picked up good traction through like engagement groups and stuff from like the athlete side of things on social media. But I think that that kind of stemmed into just me networking and my name getting in front of more people. And so there were more people that were seeing, you know, those ever so frequent like testimonies that I would put up or transformations. So then I guess around my hometown kind of started to pick up with word of mouth and oh, he's the guy to go to, this and that. And then my in-person clients that I was working with in personal training, I realized very quickly that they wouldn't be able to afford what would be optimal for them. And so I started filtering a lot of them online. Maybe we would still do like one or two sessions per week in person. But I was like, look, you're not going to pay me, and you wouldn't be able to pay me enough for how much we'd really need to be in there if we're truly doing this. And also got them on board from a nutritional aspect too through that. Um, and then yeah, from there it was just kind of word of mouth, and I eventually had someone that I met through an engagement group that was in prep for his first show or maybe second show, and he was coaching himself, and he was 11 weeks out. And I was like, look, man, like, you know, do you have a coach? Are you looking for a coach? And we got to talking this and that. I was like, look, I mean, I think I asked him like, you know, what all are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, I've never prepped anybody before, but I know that I could add value to this. So I was like, look, man, you don't have to pay me or anything, but you know, here's some things that I see like could possibly make you more efficient within the plan that you're following. Listed them out for him. I was like, I'll just pay me with your trust, and you know, we'll go into the show. And we prepped for 11 weeks. The kid turned out to be some just like freak of nature, especially his work ethic too. And he ended up he put on 2 pounds from the start of the prep to the show, and then he won the overall. And then from there, it kind of just took off.
So lots of word of mouth, but I like that you also positioned yourself in a lot of different places, right? I think that a lot of coaches like pigeonhole themselves into some niche really early, right? Like they've never had a client, or maybe they've worked with two people and they're like, I want to be the best prep coach ever, and they're neglecting Gen Pop, or they're kind of like niching down too quickly. So I like your tactic there. So now I want to go into just like what stood out to me when I saw you speak in Nashville, right? And to me, that was really setting what you called your standard, right? Like setting your coaching framework, your I guess your standard of excellence, things like that. So I want to know before we dive in, like what do you consider like your standard?
I think, I don't know, really just a point of leaving no stones unturned. You know, if we're talking about a field where there's a partnership going on. There's a coach and an athlete, sometimes even more coaches involved, but it requires everybody to be all in at the same time. And we can only play with the cards that we're dealt. But I don't think that that changes a specific individual standard that we set ourselves to. And in my opinion, again, like understanding everything that we as both a coach and an athlete know that we need to be doing, and what's going to be best, executing it to the fullest, but also still being able to be open-minded that there's things that we don't know that, you know, are either going to teach us lessons or going to make us better. Um, I, you know, I feel like trying to define it is a giant definition, but really, in my opinion, it's just fulfilling potential.
Let me ask it
And
this way, because of course, like we could all say, like, obviously excellence is just providing damn good service. Like we know that. But if we're looking at a really saturated coaching space, or you're working with an assistant coach on a team, or you're working with a new coach who's like, damn, I want to be like Cameron, right? Like, how do you look at what they're doing and audit them to see if they are setting a standard of excellence, right? Because I think a lot of coaches think they're doing a good job, and they may be missing some things that you are taking like note of, right?
sure. Um, I think this is a great question because I think I already know my answer is probably going to be something kind of unexpected, but I would first start with taking like all the X's and O's of coaching out of it. I would start looking, from an organizational aspect, like, okay, how are you organizing things now? But also, if I could tell my older self this, it's like you need to organize yourself now to really be able to organize things later in the future too. And having systems that work and, you know, are a system that's definitely takes care of the now, but like it's beyond just the now. You know what I mean? Making sure organization is there, then kind of diving into communication, like understanding people, and making sure really that the framework is solid and sturdy enough to then start building the house on. Because a lot of the stuff with coaching is information that you're not going to know until situations present themselves or time just passes, and time's going to pass regardless. So get everything else set up on the forefront. I feel like that's huge.
So if a coach comes to you, because I know that people listening to this, I'm very big on like giving specifics. So let's give an example. Let's say Coach A, let's call him Brad. Brad seems like Brad's a cool dude. Brad's been coaching for a year. Okay. He's had maybe 30 clients total, and he's really struggling with retention. So people are maybe staying 3 to 4 months or not staying long enough, right? Like, what are you going to first look at? And Brad's like, dude, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I swear I'm a good coach, right? But his clients keep leaving after, 90 to 120 days. Where are you going to first audit their business, or their coaching process, rather?
Again, I'm gonna still probably look back to the organizational stuff and the framework and making sure everything's great there. There's not like check-ins that are being missed, or maybe there's communicational flaws on his end simply due to the fact that he didn't even realize that there was anything wrong. The next thing I would probably want to see what his production looks like as a coach too. Like, is he actually getting results with these athletes? The ones that are leaving, how long what's like the average retention time of those that are falling off? Because I think a lot of coaches leave communication not there's just certain ways of communication I feel like don't get tapped by many coaches, meaning just like making sure that a bridge is built for communication between uncomfortable topics from athlete to coach. You can produce results all you want to, but at the end of the day, like there's still a difference between wants and needs from an athlete's perspective. Um, so yeah, I would look at the productions. I would try and figure out, like what's his communication style with these athletes? Like how does it look the same person to person across the board? Is there some level of relatability that he's giving to these athletes? And yet I feel like within all of that, looking at production, because if that's not there, then you can truly dive into X's and O's. If he's not organized, then there's no notes for anything for us to look back on. Like I feel like all loose ends would eventually get tied up. Um, and then maybe too, like if they're dropping off after 1 to 2 months, put a 3 month commitment minimum, or 6 month. Um,
So I'm going to
but
stop you
yeah,
there, because I know everyone listening is going to be like, Taeler would never say that. LOL. And the reason I brought up the 3 month thing is because the average retention rate is like 9 months industry wide, right? So if somebody is dropping off before that, I would typically say, what's going on, right? Because again, if somebody hires you for a legitimate 12-week prep, I'm not talking about those people, but then I would still make the argument of, why is that coach not staying with you to reverse them out or something like that, right? So if your retention sucks, I would not encourage you to increase your contract rate because somebody will still try to fight you on that. And chances are, if you're listening to this, you probably don't have an attorney or a collections process or any of that legal backing. So I encourage coaches to create contract lengths based on their framework, right? So if you get results on average in 6 months, and I don't mean start to finish, because we can make the argument of like, I could tell you that I'm never going to leave my coach. There's always something we're working on. But generally speaking, your framework, if you take all the outliers or remove them for a second, but like your top 5 performing clients, when did they hit those activation points? That's what I would set your contract length based on. And then ideally, you want to get at least 2 contract lengths out of a client before they're totally done. Ideally, in a perfect world, right? So, I mean, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, like pick your contract length. But I think the question is, if somebody is like, okay, cool, Taeler, Cameron, that sounds great. How do I develop my framework? How do you help coaches figure out what that even looks like?
Framework as in
Like their coaching framework.
what specifics to it do you mean? Like,
Like developing their unique process to get results. Like, are you kind of working with coaches to kind of develop how they might stand out in the space versus someone else? And I'm not talking about marketing or any of that. I mean, like just truly
yeah.
selling their process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, goes back to kind of the setting the standard thing. I think because everyone's gonna have, even at like their fullest, like setting their standard to the highest, like everyone's gonna have their own like spice and flavor and like style of doing things that they give off. And a big part of that, I believe, comes from being authentic too, and then expressing yourself to the fullest in this field of work. Um, and I'm trying to think back to the question. Can you say it one more
Yeah,
time?
well, I actually am gonna like you're taking things in a way that's like helpful because did you find that it was challenging at first to be authentic or to just like show personality online, or was that always easy for you?
Um, so I'm super introverted actually, and like really shy and kind of private in a way too. Um, but I think there's certain characteristics that I probably should show more of. Like, I think there's necessities to your characteristics and style that you need to show online. And I think some of those should be, or really a lot of them should be, what your strengths are as a coach. Like if I'm showing that, I care through different forms of expressing that, whether it's coaching related or not, like showing that I care, showing I have a good heart. Um, Showing organization like in my life. I think those things are super important. Um, again, there's probably some things that probably would be better if I showed too, but at the same time too, I sometimes feel like it's not authentically me, or I've just been too busy. But
I work
yeah,
with a lot of coaches that are introverted. That's why I bring it up. I work with a lot of coaches who are like, "Oh, I'm introverted. Like that's such a, it's so hard to get out of my shell." And to be honest, I think that's what makes you you, right? Like I
yeah,
think it's really hard to relate to a coach that's, perfect. Everything is filtered, everything is constructed, right? Like if I mess up on camera, I just leave it in there and keep going. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's why I brought that up with you because I know that you're somebody who is more introverted and more on the shy side or just reserved side. And so, but you're obviously getting killer results for your clients. So you're clearly not shy with your clients. Like you're being aggressive with their performance and all of that. And so how do you, again, I know you're getting leads from referrals, but like, let's say coaches are listening to that and they're thinking, damn, I'm also shy and introverted, but I'm not getting a ton of referrals, right? Like I'm still trying to market myself, which again, I don't know if you have any tips on that, but like, how are you working with yourself actively to kind of like showcase personality to people that aren't your clients yet? Like, how are you working on that?
gotcha. So one thing I kind of wanted to tie it back to, because my social media, I guess just the output was a little bit different and has changed as I've gotten into my coaching career. Towards the beginning, there was more educational content, or I don't think more of me like training and stuff as an athlete, because again, I had a maybe like 25,000 followers that I built up before I was even coaching. You know, I just gone through my first show and my first prep. I remember my little brother learning just a ton about like social media. He was like, "Oh, you got to post every single day." And I was in those engagement groups, stuff like that. But anyways, when I first started and I didn't have as many clients and a lot more time on my hands, there was a lot more just educational stuff that I was putting out. Um, as I got into things, you know, I do everything through Google Sheets, and I would show like transformations and then like slide to the right, and you'd see like the amount of weeks, at the average body weight per week, change week to week, like body measurement, all the things that were my framework as a coach that I could display because I collected data like that. I made spreadsheets, you know, I kept tabs on everything. So I was able to display that there through captions. I would explain stuff more as well. And then to now, I think me showing myself is just that production side. Like I even if I knew it would help to put out a bunch of educational stuff, like I want to be me in a sense that's like a little bit more low key. He's more of like a producer than an educator. And I remember ever since I first gotten into things, like looking at pages like Andrew Vu, Shelby Starnes, I just remember they were just very minimal with their captions. They're, you know, that you look at 20 posts. I didn't even know Shelby Starnes was a guy for like a whole year and a half until he did a live Q&A. I thought Shelby was a girl, you know, but
Shout out Shelby if you ever listen to this, like
yes, sorry, bro. But yeah, you know, it was just like things that I could relate to, I guess, in a sense. And yeah, I guess if that kind of answers it. But I think that that describes me too, because, you know, even not on social media, I am a little bit more reserved, kept to myself. And yeah.
yeah. Let's dive into the actual delivery of services, right? So whenever, one of the struggles that I hear with my clients a lot is that what do I do when somebody doesn't check in, and how do I keep tabs of that, right? Because, in my opinion, if you've got a high roster, not everyone's going to check in every single week. However, at what point do you reach out, or at what point do you kind of just leave it where it's at, right? Because obviously you can't force somebody to check in. Some clients truly are not a great fit, but ultimately, the ones that are checking in are the ones getting the best results. So what is your system for that, and how much like outreach do you do as the coach, or do you put the accountability on the client? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so I've got a Google sheet for just my head count on my roster, and I also have it broken up into my different check-in days, and there's a checkbox beside their name. So when athletes check in with me, they fill out a Google form, and as I go through those, I can just look on there and then check them off as I do them. Um, and so at the end of the week or at the end of that day, if I start noticing like a name with an unchecked box, like coming up pretty frequently and enough for me to be like, wait a minute, I think that that box wasn't checked last week too. Um, Depending on the person and how much they invest in, and also to just knowing their personality type and what's a norm for them in terms of check-in frequency, and do I think they really need something, or like that person's probably totally fine, like they'll reach out. I will or will not reach out and check. I think when I first got into coaching, I'm pretty sure if you didn't check in, like I went through the whole entire list and messaged every single one of them at the end of the day, every
I did that
time.
too, and it was impossible to scale my business that way. But yes.
Yeah, and well, I think just at two, it was at first too, it was just like, I need you guys to buy in, like just give me time to produce, and I'll show. So I was just like, then I think it was more of a necessity, like I needed to. Whereas now it's like as you do gain skill, demand gets higher, and your desire to, I guess express the skill and continue to work on your craft, like you have to be selective with who is going to fit that mold. And it's probably too now why it's not as much of like me chasing after people, because I want to teach the athletes to look out for themselves.
Well, and that's teaching accountability. I mean, I've said this to my clients and coaches too. It's like, there's always that question from any coach, any good coach who is just doing it for the right reasons, right? Like they want everyone to show up, they want everyone to check in. And in the beginning, you take it personal if somebody doesn't, right? You take it personal when somebody leaves, you take it personal when they don't re-sign, right? Even if it's not you. And so I think it's just important to kind of talk about what that process looks like, because every coach I've ever asked this question to has a completely different way of answering it. But I do know that retention is a real thing, right? Especially when you are a luxury service, right? Like you're not a necessity to a lot of people. And so we're the first things that people cut oftentimes if their spouse gets laid off, if something's going on. And so, I'm always curious to know how coaches develop those relationships to really transition their services from a non-essential to an essential.
A good question, because I think it's still always kind of an ongoing process. And again, I think it comes down to the people, different types of people, different types of athletics and interests, create a heavier necessity for the service involved. Probably also that client's knowledge level as well. There's anybody from a person that's never stepped in the gym before to also someone that's been coaching for a decade, that they just want accountability and something for them to work on themselves where they don't have to be the coach. Also probably like the relationship, is it a friend that you're working with? That could either be a good or a bad thing. I think it's tough. I think one of the big things is standing up for your own self and your own business. And when you are setting your standard at the beginning, part of that is also what it is that you're making sure that it is known and aware by the clients when it comes to your expectations and their responsibilities, and just a mutual respect from party to party.
And
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that could
think
literally
it's,
be a topic for like you. I feel like you and I could go back and
yeah,
forth for like an hour on that. It's in
for
it.
sure.
I feel like it wasn't even like a singular question. It was just more of like, what are your thoughts on that? Because like there's so many coaches entering this space now that have no business coaching. And so that's why I always like to get really clear on coaches like yourself who have a really dialed in process, and like things that you're doing may seem so rudimentary, but they're like groundbreaking to a brand new coach who hears them. And so that's why I'm being like really specific with asking you, like, what do you do? What are your processes? You know what I mean? So, I want to ask you how you build those relationships, and you have broken down kind of three different types of clients or athletes that you work with, and how you kind of treat them a little bit differently, right? And so I want to dive into a few of those, and I'm sure coaches listening may have ways that they categorize the clients, right? Like, you have the type A clients, you've got the people that are more laid back. So for you, you have meticulous and robotic, which I'm sure if you're listening to this, think about the clients that fit into these molds, right? Then you have the clients that are laid back. And then you mentioned something called patient and organic, where they pretty much are like, they're no rush, they trust you, they're probably pretty low key. Let's start with the meticulous and robotic, right? Like, give me an idea of how you're treating or coaching those clients in a little bit of a different way. And I want to kind of go through each of these.
Yeah, so for all my type A listeners, because I know there's probably a lot of y'all on here. Um,
Entrepreneur.
yeah, I mean, yeah, these are the athletes that it's fun to work. I mean, it's fun to work with all types of athletes, but these ones in particular, for me, myself, and my style of doing things, I feel like we mesh really well because I've got spreadsheets, data charts, like all of the things are there for them to their OCD to go crazy, right? But at the same time, too, these are some athletes that I feel like I have to put extra attention into, hey, take a chill pill, take a little step back. I am tracking all of these things, but also, too, like if there's some boxes that are unfilled or like you go on a trip, we're going to be good if it's blank, I promise. The ones that I have to kind of teach the whole like, okay, like, yes, like I do need you to be robotic in a time and a place, like the ones where it's like, I know we got a prep starting in a few months. Let me make sure that you're taking a free meal every week. Let me make sure you're doing some things that aren't bodybuilding or aren't fitness related. Um, but they like, because like I said, for me, it's a type of athlete that I think fits my system really well. Um, and I personally feel like it's really easy once those athletes have bought in. They're the ones that sometimes might take a little bit extra time to build that full trust into things. But once it's there, I feel like it's just a very seamless just groove and sync that can be found.
Yeah. Um, so, okay, how, now the laid back person, right? Like, in my opinion, someone who's laid back, are they getting results as quickly? Are they getting better results? Can you even really tell? Because I think sometimes us type A people, like we almost are overkill. Like our type A-ness sometimes harms us more than it helps us, right? So give me like the lowdown on like the laid back client and how you increase urgency to act.
Sure, sure. So, and I want to say this too, and I don't want it to come off anywhere or make it feel like it has to apply to them because they fall in either category. But sometimes I notice that from a genetic standpoint, clients can find themselves on either side of the coin when it comes to their personality types or athlete types. Like let's say, for example, too, like you look at the natural bodybuilding realm, right? Like they're pulling out every single piece of data to ensure progress, looking at every study because they don't have drugs to rely on, right? They got to figure it all out. And sometimes too, I'll see when maybe an athlete does respond really well to gear, or they do have really great genetics, until they've reached a certain level of success, like they're going to be the above average individual that is going to be able to, I don't want to say get by, but get away with more than, again, someone that might have to dig it all out. And I've also seen incredible genetics on the super OCD meticulous side too. So again, I don't want to say it applies to everybody, but I do think it can cause bias and just a direction of nature. So yeah, some of these athletes again, like they that are the type being kind of laid back, it's just because they haven't had to be uptight because they've been able to get away with just their sheer raw potential, or maybe it's someone that doesn't have a lot of genetic ability, or maybe they're just more on the average side, and it's like, hey, we've really got to bust it here to get progress out. Like it's not going to just happen for us. And for those that are really great naturally, then it's making them understand that like, hey, you're good, sure, compared to the majority around you, but like that's not what I care about. Like, how good are you compared to how good you can be? And having them understand that like, and it sometimes it can take showing up at a really good show or whatever it may be to almost get like a reality check, and sometimes it can make or break people. But making sure that the athletes understand like where you can go with this, like that's the norm. Like you're not going to be able just to get by doing this, and making sure that they raise the bar for their own selves, because I think that's what it comes down to is they don't maybe realize what they can accomplish or what they can do, and so they just settle for this idea and notion that's not as scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Um, and I mean, yeah, like looking at all these categories, like none of it can be dogmatic, right? Like nothing can be with coaching. So I think it's important to also to mention that. But I think that some of our newer coaches or really any coach, right? Sometimes it's hard to adjust how you are as an athlete, right? Like we can't understand why somebody can't hit their macros or why somebody can't perform because like it's easy for us, but we're like, why is that hard for them? And I think that's where coaches really struggle. But if everyone stuck to everything all the time, we wouldn't have a job, right? Like that's why we do what we do. So what about the patient and organic? That's the third type of client. How is that different than what we've mentioned before?
I think a lot of these you may either see because they've had great coaching in the past prior to them coming to you. It could be someone that maybe they have an athletic background where they've had these certain principles and discipline instilled in them at early ages and developmental ages, so that it's just what they've kind of created as a framework for their life. Um, Also, a lot of military or ex-military clientele, usually super great as well. Um, but typically someone that's coming to you truly ready to hire a coach, someone that is willing to be open-minded, is willing to accept and respect roles of the parties involved. And almost it almost kind of feels like if you're an author writing a book, like you're starting on a page one is a blank page, rather than like, oh, we got a few chapters back here that we got to now start to write in the rest of the book, right? Like you're starting fresh. They're very quick to pick up and build habits rather than having to correct and then make new. Um, but yeah, organic very well may look different from coach to coach, depending on just their style of doing things. Like there's plenty of great coaches that don't use spreadsheets and data points that I do and everything like that. But again, I think it could be individual to coach based on coaching style. But I think the big premise is just an athlete that's truly ready to give their trust, like blind trust, even when they maybe don't want to or think it's the right move. And again, just accept the responsibility of the role that they're in.
You're getting a lot of referrals, right? So, and sometimes I can tell you referrals are like the worst clients. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes I'm like, damn, why did somebody give this person to me? Like they were not ready. So I'm curious to know, like, if you have any tips for people listening on how to pre-qualify clients, right? And I'm not talking about financial, I'm talking about just like if they're going to be a good fit for your coaching container.
Um, yeah, for sure. So one, I think the biggest thing is making sure that the right questions are on the intake form or the inquiry form, and making sure that there's questions that are being asked that describe that person as an athlete from even a personal preference side of things, or maybe little things that they could pick up on as this person that type A or type B. Um,
Are there any specific
yeah,
questions like on your intake form that would like fit that description or your application or whatever?
yeah, I was gonna say also too, like, asking what their goals are and like I guess desired time frame and that you have to work with, because that's a whole like initial for sure like ice breaking topic that has to be had if those aren't agreed upon. Honestly, for me, I feel like I've been doing this enough, and I'm able to read people really well that probably any like short answered question, I feel like I can read the way that people are going to type it out. For the most part, have a good idea. An initial conversation is definitely going to show more. Um, but yeah, like asking like what's their expectations, like that's such a huge thing. I feel like when it comes to the customer satisfaction piece of things, is also as well as just like your rate of success, is making sure that expectations on both sides of the coin are met, because from the athlete side, like we got to know what it is that they're expecting, because we don't want to just initially, over promise and under deliver, whether it's things that the expectations for them are like beyond even necessary and ridiculous. Like you still got to make sure that the expectations are there, and if they're a little bit off, like making sure on the call, that on a consult call or any kind of initial conversation, that again you almost like have a disclaimer of like, hey, we need to go over this before you sign up. Because there's a lot of times where I'll have someone apply and it's like, oh, I have a show in X amount of time, or even like I want to do a show later this year, and it's like, hey, I'd love to work with you, but before we get into that, I just want to make sure we're not having a conversation 4 months from now while you're like, oh, I thought we were going to be doing a show. So that's the biggest thing I would have to say and wrap it up to, is just expectations and making sure that those are talked about. And I feel like from there, conversation can flow pretty easily.
And not breaking expectations or boundaries rather, right? Like I think a lot of coaches will hear somebody's expectations or hear somebody's price point, like, oh, I can't pay that, but I could pay this. And then a coach is really quick to modify their price or change their contract. Like, I think it's really important that you do hold your ground with your framework and your process, and you're not changing that based on the person, because if that's the case, it tells me there's not confidence in your framework and structure, right? I think it's really easy to do that in the beginning.
For sure, for sure. And that also really ties back to the question that you were asking too about, athletes looking at this like a necessity or like a bill rather than a luxury. It's just that as like really establishing and showing, hey, this is a business. Like there's a sign in front of me that says business, you know?
I mean, yes, turn the light, like the open and close sign, like maybe I should
Yeah,
close my
exactly.
door. It'd be really, really cute on the outside of my house. Um, okay, so just a few last, like business kind of questions to wrap this up, but what advice do you have out there for new aspiring contest prep coaches, right? They don't have a huge roster. They're not getting the referrals. They're breaking into the online coaching space in 2024, and they are chasing after pro cards and whatever else it looks like. Like, what advice can you give them?
Your level, the amount of time that you put into this doesn't dictate if you should accept losing or not. I think that's something that can be very easily like, oh, like anytime I've got on calls with people just doing like consulting with their coaching and just helping them wherever they need, it's almost like oh, well, I haven't been doing this as long, so my people can't, like don't need to look like that. It comes off that way in a sense, or almost like, oh, I know I'm not at your level yet, and it's like, well, like yeah, that's why we're here. You know what I mean? Like, but I just remember when I first got into it, like again, like the first guy I put on stage, he had won the overall, and then the next guy after that, he went pro and got second at Universe, and he wasn't even supposed to be doing Universe, and we just tossed him into it. Then the third, like she went pro at North Americans, and it was just something out the gate that it was like I had to establish that, and it was just the momentum that I started with, and I tried to surround my eyes with the highest standard that I could find from a coaching aspect and really develop my eye. And it's like, I'm not gonna rush the success. Like I'm not just gonna put the people on stage to put them on stage, because as a coach, I feel like you have such a big first impression that sets the tone for your whole career. Um, and I don't think I'm not gonna say it's easy to make a good first impression, but it's a lot more simple to make a good one than it is having to fix a bad one. And it's probably going to take more time and more effort and putting your foot down on things, but it's like that's your way in, that's your foot in the door.
I think a lot of coaches will hear that too and think, holy shit, like your first three people crushed it. And here I am trying to dial in a peak week for the first time, and I'm like nervous, right? So, can you give those coaches like, because again, like prep it's challenging, right? There's a lot of variables involved and whatnot. And it's like, how can you act when you don't have total confidence? Like, how can you still confidently make a change with your athlete before you've totally figured it out?
I mean, so first, I still sometimes get nervous setting up protocols or, just going through stuff. Not as much anymore, but like, like there's always like show day nerves that pop up and like just little things like, let me look over this one more time. But I mean, I even said in the beginning, like I didn't even feel like I could confidently sit there and be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing until I was probably 3, 4 years into it. And the first 3 to 4 years were really good seasons. Like that, that they were really good winning seasons. And I had all the reason to be confident, but it took time, and I started young. Like my first season coaching, I was 19. So there was a lot of like imposter syndrome being young in the industry and field, but it was just one of those things like I wasn't gonna take no for an answer when it came to being successful with it. And like it's gonna be nervous, like you're gonna mess up. And I think for myself, I would have walked a lot more confidently if I just accepted the fact that I was gonna make mistakes. But like every time I made one of those mistakes, I found a way to get better. And find good mentors, find good people to reach out to learn from that, kind of have your back when you do make those mistakes and tell you to keep going. And just, yeah, hold a high standard to yourself.
How many coaches have you peaked at the same time?
How many what?
How many like peak weeks have you had simultaneously? Like how many athletes have you peaked at the same time? Sorry.
Oh, the first year coaching, I put 5 into a show and I was like, I'm never doing that again.
How did
So
you
like the most I'll even, huh?
how did you keep track of everything?
So I had little sheets set up as well. But what really messed it up was I made like a show day, like and like 1 day out schedule for everybody, and I put them in all in rooms of two, and then like one in a room by herself. And like I would have, okay, this time y'all check, and then all right, 15 minutes later, well, one person got thrown off, and it just ruined everything. So from there, I learned that understanding my limits was definitely an important thing. And I'll only put like 2, maybe 3 into a show weekend at the same time.
I just thought I'd ask that because I mean, I've never done more than like one simultaneously, thankfully. I've intentionally been like, no, I need to just like have one at a time. But again, I'm not trying to build a legacy in contest prep here. But speaking of that, my last question for you is what do you want your legacy to be? Like I know we're still building and all of that, but like, what do you want to be known for?
I think honestly, just being really damn good, and but honest, like being a good person too. And I should have said that first, but I remember whenever John Meadows passed away, and I never even really watched a lot of his stuff, unfortunately, especially when he was still around. So I didn't really know a ton about him, but I just remembered everyone talking so like just the impact that he made on everybody, and just everyone had nothing but good things to say about how he was kind and generous, and it didn't matter who you were, like if you asked him something or talked to him, like he'd treat you like you were the number one person in his world. Um, I don't know. It just always jumped out to me. And there's probably like 3 podcasts have said that in some way, shape, or form on now. But that and yeah, like I said, just it being like really damn good at it and kind of doing it in a way that no one else has done. And yeah, being me.
That's the thing. Like, if anyone ever tells me my legacy is to make like $1 million or whatever, that's not even a legacy, but like I would say, okay, bye. And I love that
Yeah,
because I think a lot of contest prep coaches, not a lot, but I come across contest prep coaches that are very like ego driven and I love that you're so humble about, I mean, seriously, you are so humble about how good you are and never lose that. Like that to me is
thank
why you're
you.
going to go really far in the industry. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share? I want to know what you listen to when you work out. That's what I want to know. That's what I want to leave this on.
Oh man,
What's on the
I've been
playlist?
usually a lot of Gunna, Future, Young Thug, Travis Scott.
I definitely had you pegged for rap. Okay, we could not share playlists.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I think Taylor Swift was on the other day, and I
That's
was
not
like,
on my
man,
playlist
I feel
either.
good right now.
Which era of Taylor were you listening to?
It was Wildest Dreams.
Not nice. And you were just
I
what were
put it on my story on Instagram. I didn't give a shit. I
oh
was
wait,
like Monday morning jams. Yeah,
I think I saw that. You're like Taylor's
that was
going
that
hard this
day.
morning.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure that I link your information in the show notes. And Cameron, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.